A few years ago, I worked at Walmart with a man named Jim, who was much older than me. Although it was my first job, I didn't enjoy it much, and it was mostly due to some of my coworkers who made the experience miserable. Jim was a tall, skinny man with a balding head who had struggled with addiction in the past. Despite being in his mid-40s, he looked much older. Most people at work didn't like him because he would often act irrationally and have a negative demeanor. Although I tried to be polite to him, I would keep our conversations brief because I wasn't interested in talking to him. Before I quit, there were rumors circulating that Jim was a pedophile, which made me even more uncomfortable around him, especially since I was only 17 at the time. On my last night of work, Jim was acting even stranger than usual, and I had to find a way to keep myself occupied until it was time to leave. I don't know much about him other than what I already shared, but he always gave me an uneasy feeling. It wasn't clear why he seemed so angry all the time, but even small things would set him off, leading to temper tantrums almost every night he worked. Fortunately, I didn't work with him often because he mostly worked nights, whereas I usually worked mornings for school. However, I would occasionally cover shifts for my colleagues, which is why I was there that night. As I was sweeping up in the back, he snuck up behind me and grabbed my arm. I was startled and pulled out my headphones, asking him what the hell he was doing. He laughed and apologized, offering me a joint he pulled from his pocket. I declined, telling him to leave me alone, but he persisted. Eventually, I raised my voice and reminded him that I didn't smoke weed, was a minor, and threatened to report him to the manager. When I mentioned being underage, he gave me a disturbingly creepy smile that made me feel ill. Luckily, he eventually left me alone and walked away. After finishing my work, I walked outside to meet my dad, who was waiting for me in the parking lot. Unfortunately, Jim was out there too, smoking weed in plain sight. Despite no one seeming to care, I was annoyed by his presence and quickly walked past him. As I took a few steps towards my dad, Jim called out to me, offering me a hit of his joint. Thankfully, my dad witnessed the interaction and stepped out of his car to confront him. He told Jim to back off and asked what his problem was. Although Jim got mouthy, it was clear he didn't want to start a fight with my dad. I couldn't help but wonder why he was so insistent on me smoking with him. It felt like he was trying to take advantage of me, but I can't say for sure. All I know is that he was creepy and wouldn't leave me alone, which made me uncomfortable. I quit my job at Walmart and didn't show up for my next shift. I informed my boss about what had happened, and he was understanding. Jim might have been fired, but I'm not sure. Even if I could have continued working there, I didn't feel safe after what had happened. My dad is very protective of me, and I don't think he would have allowed me to work there anymore anyways. During my time working at the local Walmart, it was just another ordinary day. Though the job wasn't particularly enjoyable, I was fortunate to have some school friends on staff, making the hours pass more quickly. One evening, while working the overnight shift, I noticed an older man in the store for over an hour without a cart or any items in hand. Although it was peculiar, I couldn't take action as he hadn't done anything wrong or illegal. This was during Walmart's 24/7 hours. Pre-COVID, and working late was effortless for me as a night owl. My responsibilities mainly consisted of tidying up and some restocking. However, I kept seeing the man roaming aimlessly around the store, and after spotting him several times, I approached him to ask if he required assistance finding anything, mentioning that I noticed he had been there for some time. For a while, he remained stationary, gawking at me like a bizarre individual, refusing to speak. Suddenly, he bolted in the opposite direction, occasionally glancing back at me as if paranoid about something. It was one of the oddest occurrences in my life, and I couldn't fathom what had just transpired. An hour elapsed before I saw him again, and for a moment, I thought he had left the store. However, when I laid eyes on him, his shirt was smeared with what resembled blood, and my mind immediately jumped to conclusions that something dreadful had happened. Despite this, I couldn't shake off the notion that it was a revolting prank. The time was around 1 in the morning, with only 2 other employees in the vast store, and I hadn't seen a customer for over 30 minutes. It was an isolating experience, and I was overcome with fear. Although I could have fled, a deep sense of discomfort prevented me from doing so, and I remained frozen in place as he continued to stare at me intensely. Eventually, I snapped out of my daze, started walking backward, and spun around to locate assistance. I genuinely believed he would pursue me, but when I turned, he had vanished. I sought out one of my colleagues, and together we contacted the police. It took approximately 20 minutes for them to arrive, and to our dismay, the perpetrator was still wandering about the store. We sprinted to the back, barricaded ourselves in one of the manager's offices, and watched the security footage as the individual endlessly roamed about, likely searching for me or another person to intimidate. Eventually, the police apprehended him, and the reality of the situation was astounding. The blood on his clothing was genuine. He had allegedly stabbed himself repeatedly with a pocket knife in the Walmart restroom, leaving a trail of blood throughout the store. The incident left me feeling anxious and uneasy, and my boss was kind enough to send me home early. I can only hope that the man was evaluated in a psychiatric facility following his hospitalization, and, if necessary, incarceration. Reflecting on the event, I shudder to think what would have transpired if I had inadvertently provoked him. Individuals of this nature are notoriously unpredictable, and I am grateful to have lived to recount the tale. I worked at Walmart for a brief period, approximately 4 years ago, during a part of one summer. I only managed to last a month before quitting. Out of all the jobs I have held, this was by far the shortest duration. However, due to my financial needs at the time, I had no choice but to take it up. During my time there, I was primarily stationed near the self-checkout area, responsible for monitoring and assisting customers with any issues they faced. This task was not without its fair share of problems, such as registers malfunctioning or customers accidentally scanning items twice. One evening, I was working until close, which was at 11 p.m. It was around 9:30 or 10 p.m., and I had already been working for a few hours. The self-checkouts were busy, and we had about 8 registers, one of which was out of order. I observed around 5 customers scanning their items, and I was standing in a corner, watching over them. At some point, a man caught my attention. He seemed to be surveying the area as he walked by, and then again as he reached the register. His shopping basket was full of items, and I watched as he scanned an item, put it in a bag, and then placed the bag in his basket. He repeated this process with one more item and then paid for the items. However, instead of leaving, he continued to stuff other items into the bags before attempting to exit the checkout area. At this point, I was infuriated because it was evident that the man was attempting to steal merchandise. I immediately followed him and caught up with him as he was leaving the area. I told him that he needed to scan all of his items, not just 2 of them. The man appeared surprised, but quickly turned hostile and accused me of accusing him of stealing. He pointed out that he had not left the store yet, so technically he had not stolen anything. He threw his 2 bags into a candy display, exclaiming that he didn't want anything from the store, and left them there before storming out. I was unsure how to interpret the encounter, so I returned to work as we closed up for the night. I worked for another hour until the store was finally closed, clocked out, gathered my belongings, and exited into the dark and silent parking lot. As I approached my car, I was immediately blinded by the headlights of the vehicle parked directly in front of mine. The driver had turned on their brights just as I had gotten into my car. Suddenly, I heard a door open and close, and before I knew it, the man from earlier was walking towards my driver's window. He knocked on the glass, and I hesitantly lowered it just a crack. He demanded that I get out of the car, and his tone of voice was aggressive. I was not interested in talking to him, and when I asked why, he cursed at me and continued to demand that I exit the vehicle. Feeling uneasy about the situation, I barely managed to lock the door just in time as he tried to open it. He then proceeded to kick near the headlights of my car as I shifted it into reverse and backed away. Thankfully, he did not follow me in his car, and I sped out of the parking lot as quickly as possible. After this terrifying experience, I strongly considered quitting my job at Walmart. I ended up applying for a different job the next day and quit the following week. Throughout my years working there, I had encountered some unusual individuals, but this man was by far one of the strangest. I'm not sure how he knew which car was mine or why he waited for me to finish work, but I am relieved that I didn't have to find